But now they were no longer afraid of God. They didn't think they'd die the death. And this has been the devil's instrument to get us to sin ever since. Remove the fear of the Lord and people sin. It's as simple as that. And if you remember in the first reading I read from Exodus 20, Moses said, God is testing you so that the fear of the Lord will stop you sinning. Again, it's a very simple equation. If you fear the Lord, you don't sin. If you don't fear the Lord, you do. If you're not afraid of what the Lord would do to you, you will run risks. You'll play games. And that's what they did. The Bible always blames Adam for that, incidentally, not Eve, because though she was the first to take the fruit, Adam was there all the time, and he never opened his mouth, like most husbands. Have you watched couples on TV being interviewed after a disaster hit them? Who does all the talking? Who has to face the interviewer? The man sits there like a mugwump while she has to... And that's exactly what Adam did in the garden. And it says he was standing by Eve while she argued with the devil, and he never protected her. He never opened his mouth, and that's why the Bible never blames Eve for what happened, but blames the husband. But that's another story. From then on, that's the first mention of the wrong kind of fear. The right kind of fear was there from the beginning, but it became the wrong kind of fear, and it paralyzed Adam and Eve, and they hid in the bushes when God came near. You see, the wrong kind of fear takes over. They had a healthy fear of God, but it became a phobia, and they didn't want to know God. Didn't want to have anything to do with Him, and it paralyzed them. From then on, there are two lines of people right through the rest of the Bible. One line fears the Lord, and the other doesn't. One line is Seth, and the other line is Cain. And they go right on down, right through the pages of the Bible. When we open the book of Exodus, you find that Pharaoh is killing the babies. But there's a lovely little comment. He was killing all the baby boys to try and wipe out the Jews. It was the first Holocaust. It was the first attempt at genocide. But it just says this: the midwives feared the Lord. They protected the baby boys. And it says the Lord gave them babies of their own because they feared Him. Isn't that beautiful? Again, you'll find for the rest of the Bible, God has special blessings for those who fear Him. He has special provision for them, special protection for them. The hosts of the Lord encamp around who? Those that fear the Lord. Let's move on through Exodus. When the laws, the commandments were given, Moses said this: these commands are for us to obey and to fear the Lord our God. It was the fear of what He could and would do to them if they deliberately went against His will. He gave them altogether 613 laws, which covered every aspect of life, from their food to their clothes, from their work to their leisure, every aspect of life, even their houses. One of His laws was if you got dry rot in the house, you had to burn it down out of love for your neighbor. That was the law of God right back then. I'm breaking one law of Moses because this suit, which was the best that Christian Aid or what? No, it was Cancer Relief, I think. The £5 suit, but it's breaking the law of Moses because it's a mixture of two different kinds of material. And one of the laws of Moses is you don't wear two different kinds of material. But then I'm not under the law of Moses. I'm under the law of Christ, which is a good deal stricter. It's not concerned with what I wear outside, but what's inside the suit. And that's a good deal harder to keep. But the law of Moses covered every bit of the life. But having given it all, Moses now said, the God who has redeemed us from slavery and is going to give us a land of our own, and health, and no poverty, and no diseases of Egypt will catch us there, that God will bless those who keep His laws, and He will curse you if you don't. And reading through the blessings and the curses, particularly the curses, I'm astonished. Read Deuteronomy 28 and you are reading an amazing account of the Holocaust in the 1940s. About a year ago, I was invited to speak in an Orthodox synagogue, which I was very glad to. I get lovely opportunities to speak to God's chosen people. And I gave them a choice of 5 subjects and hoped they'd choose one. I prayed they'd choose one, and they did. And my subject was the significance of the Holocaust for Jews and Christians. All last year, the Pope went to visit Jerusalem and went to visit the Yad Vashem Memorial of the Holocaust. It was just in the news for the whole year. And yet nobody asked the simple question, where was the God of Israel during the Holocaust? Why did he abandon his own people in the hour of their greatest need? I believe you'll find the answer in Deuteronomy 28, where God promised that would happen to them. And Israel has been more blessed than any other nation by God. That's not an easy message. And frankly, in the synagogue, it was like talking to the Sanhedrin. I really felt I was back in the New Testament. There were those shouting and shaking their fists at me. But I was trying to share the truth. And the tragedy is that the very sins of the Jewish people in Europe in the first half of the 20th century are the very sins that are rampant in the Christian church today. And my question after talking of the Holocaust was to Christians, don't you fear God? See, this is a God that people are not accustomed to hearing about today. When we come to the book of Psalms, they're packed with the fear of the Lord. Just need to read the second one, and it says this, serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you be destroyed in your way, for his wrath can flare up in a moment. And the Psalms go on in that kind of strain. Blessed is the man who fears the Lord, who finds great delight in his commands. And promise after promise after promise in the book of Psalms is conditioned by the phrase, those who fear the Lord. Those promises cannot be claimed if we don't fear him. When we move to the book of Proverbs, it is just packed. You know, Solomon wrote 3 books in his lifetime. The first we call the Song of Solomon, and he wrote it when he was a young man. He was quite early on in his career. He only had 60 wives. Later he had 700, so it was fairly early in his career. You know, people used to tell me in Sunday school that Solomon was the wisest man in the Old Testament. He had 700 mothers-in-law. Is that wise? He had a lot of wisdom for other people, but none for himself. That's the tragedy of Solomon's life. And so when he was middle-aged, he wrote another book. You can tell he was middle-aged because the second book is, Now Son, Watch the Women. You know? That's not a young man talking, that's a middle-aged man talking who's sown his wild oats and now is trying to stop his boy doing the same thing. Do you know, I once heard a girl say to her mother, what did you do at my age that makes you so worried about me? And that's about the most devastating question a parent could be asked. And then he wrote, when he was an old man, he wrote a book called Ecclesiastes. And if you read chapter 12, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the legs tremble and the teeth are few and the eyes are dim. And he finishes up, after a whole life of disillusion, of disappointment, he tried everything. He was rich and powerful. He tried everything. Tried music, tried the arts, tried farming, tried building, architecture. He tried everything. And he said, it's all pointless. It's all been pointless. Got me nowhere. And his last word in his last book is, what's the sum of the whole matter? Fear God. And that's Solomon's last word, if only he'd paid attention to it himself. But you know, when he was young and wrote the Song of Solomon, there's not a word about God in it. Just girls. No God, just girls. At the end of his life, he's saying, Don't forget God while you're young. Don't throw it away. But look at the book of Proverbs, which he wrote in middle age. It's packed with this simple statement, son, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. He wanted his son to be a wise man, not a clever man, but a wise one. And the wise one will get to the end of life and say, I've used the life God gave me in the right way. I've not wasted it. That's wisdom. It begins when you're afraid of what the Lord could do to you if you don't live his way. And there are many, many young people today whose lives would be totally different if they feared the Lord. They would wait till they got married to have sex, for one thing, but they don't fear the Lord anymore. They want to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil for themselves. The prophets are full of it. If there's one cause of the problems that the prophets are tackling, it's this: you don't fear God anymore. That's why you're behaving as you do. That's why you're ignoring God. That's why you're disobeying his commands. That's why you're immoral. That's why you're idolatrous. That's why you're doing this and that. That's why you sacrifice your children. And they were. Even the king of Israel did. They didn't fear God anymore. That's why people have abortions now. They don't fear God anymore. Malachi, the last book in the Old Testament, the last page. Only two sorts of people, and one of them are a delight to God. Listen to Malachi. Then those who feared the Lord talked with one another, and the Lord listened and heard. A scroll of remembrance was written in his presence concerning those who feared the Lord and honored his name. Isn't that beautiful? God keeps a list of those who fear him. And it says of Jesus that he delighted in the fear of the Lord. That's a prophecy in Isaiah 11 about the Messiah. Jesus delighted. What does it mean? It means that when Jesus found someone who feared the Lord, it made him supremely happy. I wonder how many people are making Jesus happy that way. Well, let's turn to the New Testament. The most common illusion about the Bible is that the Old Testament has a different God to the New Testament. And that the Old Testament is all about fearing him and the New Testament is all about loving him. Have you picked up that impression? It's as old as a man called Marcion who lived about 17 centuries ago. And Marcion was the first to say, I don't like the Old Testament. The God of the Old Testament is cruel, harsh, not nice at all. He tells Israel to slaughter the Canaanites. I don't want that sort of God. But he said, I want the God of Jesus. I want the God of the New Testament. And so he took the Bible and he tore out the Old Testament. He was the first to do that. Fortunately, the church said he was a heretic. And that was not the truth. And it isn't. There is as much about the fear of the Lord in the New Testament. And actually, it wasn't long before Marcion found he had to tear out pages of the New Testament as well. Especially the book of Revelation. Listen, the God of Jesus is the God of Israel. The God and Father of our Lord Jesus is the God of the Old Testament. Jesus had no Bible but the Old Testament. And he was constantly quoting what he called the Scriptures. His Father was that God. There is no conflict or contrast, much less a contradiction, between the God of the Old and the God of the New. And yet, I picked up a book from a Christian bookshop recently because I'd heard about the author. He's now Flavor of the Month. I don't know how many preachers I've heard quote this man. I'm not going to give you his name, but every preacher's reading his books at the moment. And in particular, they've picked up a phrase from his books which is being preached all over. And it's a phrase that's not in the Bible.